Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for braving the torrential downpour and spending your evening with us as we talk about two very salient topics right now, vibes and votes. My name is Kate Bassett. I am the political director here at COURIER, and we are the largest, fastest growing pro-democracy news network in the country. Yes, yes, yes. Over the last 5 years, we have opened newsrooms in 11 states, all staffed with local award-winning journalists and trusted social media correspondents. And through their work, we have earned the trust of over 4 million subscribers, and we reach more than 90 million Americans every single week online. And many of those Americans are people who have been left behind by traditional media outlets and who are often less politically engaged, which is why we meet them where they are, always for free, in their social media news feeds and their email inboxes. And our state work focuses on both connecting the dots between politics and everyday impact and building community, because we know it takes both in order to have a healthy democracy. And because we're a media organization that is a digital-first reporting, I am so extra excited to be IRL with all of you tonight. And we're going to hear from some of the sharpest political and marketing minds doing work here today. These are people who meet this moment with bravery and hope and grace and a tireless desire to see our great country thrive. And I'm so excited to start this evening off with our founder and publisher, Tara McGowan, and a woman who needs no introduction, Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi.
It is an honor to be with you, Madam Speaker.
My honor.
Thank you so much for everything you've done for this country, and thank you for joining us tonight in the rain. Apologies for that. So I want to start with a bit about your legacy. From the very beginning of your political career over 35 years ago, you've always made it a priority from day one to make Congress more representative of America, and I would say that you've been pretty darn successful at it. And you've also been outspoken about people in positions of power creating space for fresh voices and faces at the leadership table, and you walked the talk when you decided not to run again for leadership. Why has that always been a priority for you? And also, why do you think it isn't as easy a concept or decision for some people in positions of power to do that?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm a COURIER, learning more about COURIER. My staff says that they see it all the time. So congratulations on the inroads that you're making in terms of communication, because it is, and you're democratizing it by making it more available with the truth out there. So it's great to be here. Thank you, and thank you for your leadership. In terms of leadership, most of us who are there on a mission, we're not there for a job, we're there to do a job. And there are certain things that are hard. You know, they're just hard to do, and you have to work it and to get it done. But when you see that there is an opportunity for it to be carried on, and especially to be carried on better. For example, in our presidential race, people say, well, Kamala, should she embrace Joe Biden or should she spring from it? No, and that was the Biden-Harris administration, and the Democrats in the Congress, House, and Senate created a legacy with them of great legislation. So it's not that you say, we did this, because nobody votes for you because of what you have done. They want to know what you are going to do next. You can just give evidence that you're capable of getting the job done. See what we've done so far, shared our values, showed you our success with that, but then you spring from that. So my point was that we were trying to be diverse. I always say to the members, our diversity is our strength. Our unity is our power. Diversity, strength, unity, power. And we have a fabulous leadership team that is beautifully diverse. Hakeem Jeffries, Kathleen Clark, Pete Aguilar, Ted Lieu, representing all of our caucus, and magnificently. And my mission for them is to do better than what we have done already. Very proud of what we have done. But now this is not a ceiling, this is a floor, go forward. Same thing with Kamala. This is a floor, take it to new heights. And so it is, well, I don't know, you have to ask other people why they don't see the wisdom of that, but legislating is very difficult. I think people think we go to Washington, we vote, and then somebody serves us a meal. I don't know if they call oatmeal for dinner as living on the high level end of things, but no, it's very hard because you're trying to build consensus and you have to listen to people's views that might be different from you. Not everybody represents San Francisco, as I proudly do, and I keep saying to my constituents, we work together to build our consensus. So I guess you'd have to ask people why they are there. It's always important to know your why. Why are you here? My why was the 1 in 5 children lives in poverty in America. My grandson Liam is here, and he's heard me say this so many times. My why, when I went from housewife, House member, House Speaker, was the fact that 1 in 5 children in America goes to sleep hungry at night. It lives in poverty. How could that be? So intractable to try to get done. And we did some things that were helpful, survival-wise, and then we wanted to move on to success. And with Joe Biden, we moved into transformative. 50% of the children living in poverty were out of poverty under the Biden child tax credit. And we want to do more, But, so, again, if you know your why, then all the slings and arrows and the heat that you will take, and this is not for the faint of heart, it will be worth it because you know your why. So it's more a mission than a timetable. And so people may feel that they have more to contribute in their mission. That will be up to their constituents within their caucus or wherever to decide if that's the case. But there are people who have served a very long time as committee chairs and the rest who've made remarkable contributions to the Congress. I came in the same class with John Lewis. We served together over 30 years. I would not have wanted him to walk away 1 minute sooner than God took him. So it's a relative thing in terms of what your mission is, what your goals, milestones are, what your accomplishments are, and how people respond to you when you build that consensus. And so you'd have to ask some others why, like, nobody ever asked Mitch McConnell, was he too old for the job? Never, but they would ask me for the last 20 years. And I'm like, oh, is that because I'm a woman you're asking me? Go ask Mitch. When you ask Mitch and I are about the same age. Bertie's older than I am. Nobody seems to have a problem. Oh, no, we're the same age.
We are definitely going to talk about double standards. One of the reasons we really wanted to do this event in the lead up to the election is because we all see this election not just as a tipping point for democracy, also potentially for the future of what both political parties look like after this election, and what the American population looks like. It is younger and more diverse than ever before. This is the first election where voters under 40 make up the largest swath of eligible voters ever in our history. So they have an outsized role to play in this election. And yet we hear all the time, because at Courier we engage a lot of young people on TikTok and Instagram. You are on these platforms right now, Madam Speaker, with this live stream. And we hear all the time that even the ones that are the most deeply informed and engaged about issues that impact them, like abortion, like the climate crisis, like gun violence, they are less trusting that either political party or government writ large will actually do anything that makes a difference.
And that's different from before?
I don't know that it is, right?
No, it isn't. I mean, young people traditionally have not been voting so much. When they would say, oh, the Hispanic community, they don't vote. No, they're young. They're more typical of their generation than they are of their ethnicity. And you have to recognize that. But just to go back to your first question and combine it with this. When I became Speaker, I knew I had to do something very different from before. We had 7 or 8 members of the leadership. Now we have like 18 or 19 because we kept creating more paths to the leadership, whether it was a communication team of chairs that would be, whether it was expanding the steering and policy committee, whether it was electing people who had been there fewer than 5 years to a seat there, whether it was giving the freshmen instead of the speaker, making the appointment, giving them the ability to elect their own person. So that with the beautiful diversity, more people elected to the positions than appointed. Very important. And so when we talk about the election, we have to do the same thing, democratize the election. We have a bill, and I see our dear friend from Citizens United is here. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your wonderful leadership. We have a bill called For the People. For the People is a bill that the first piece of it is ending voter suppression. John Lewis wrote the first 300 pages of that bill. It's about ending voter suppression. You can assume what it is, but it's also ending voter nullification, election nullification, which the other side has been engaged in. And it's been a long time, all through the civil rights movement, election nullification. Also with that was ending partisan redistricting. Let people choose their elected officials. Don't let elected officials choose their voters. Very important. Ending big, dark money in politics, which is Citizens United. The only thing good about them is their name, but their policy is very undemocratic, as was the Supreme Court when they voted to uphold that. The rogue court, in my view. But so making small donors, matching their small donations without taxpayers' money, but matching those to encourage more participation at that level. So when young people think, and even older people, what difference does it make if I vote? Big dark money's going to call the shots. And by the way, they were suffocating the airwaves. So people didn't even know what was real or wasn't real as to what they were hearing, and it's gotten worse and worse under, what's his name? So we have to make sure people know, young people know, how important their involvement is. Traditionally, they have, God bless you, traditionally they have been lower voter turnout. That may not be the case this time because people do know what is at stake in terms of saving the planet, which they tell us is a priority, which you tell us is a priority. LGBTQ rights with our Equality Act, which you tell us is your priority. Women's right to choose, these are democracy issues. They're not just issues, they're values about democracy. Issues that relate to gun violence prevention. Young people tell us that's important to them. They've lived through horrible things or seen it happen in schools and the rest. of their same age group when they were younger. Now, the kids in Connecticut, this is their first year to vote. All that time has gone by. So again, to not only have the policy, but to make it known. President Lincoln said public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, practically nothing. But for public sentiment to weigh in, people have to know. So we all have a responsibility to be transparent, accountable, as bipartisan as possible when that is possible. It's not always, it's become less possible, but we still have a responsibility to strive for it. But make democracy more democratic would be appealing to young people, to all people, but especially, I think, to young people from what they tell us. And again, that can change, but the future belongs to the young. They should take responsibility for it by being active civically, politically, or even run for office. Again, not for the faint of heart, but nonetheless necessary to have that constant reinvigoration.
No, it's a great segue. So we want to talk about how do you reach more young people, right? Something that we pride ourselves on at COURIER is trying to make politics and government more accessible to people who don't pay attention or aren't students of it or as engaged with it. And we know that an image is worth 1,000 words. It always has been. But in today's really saturated and decentralized media environment, a single image or moment, especially one that can connect culturally with audiences, has the power to shape an entire news story or narrative better than any headline could. And I think you know something about this. I think we have just a few images. Iconic is the word that comes to mind with those. And I'm curious, also imagery has always been important, right? I'm a student of politics and government who remembers, the very first presidential debate and how that was dissected. It's always mattered. But with everything moving so quickly right now, I'm curious how you think this viral moment-dominated media environment has changed how people who want to run for office, or people who are in elected office like yourself, navigate building power.
Well, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, in some cases more than that. But words weigh a ton, too. And it's important to not only seek out the image, the optic of it all, but to listen to the words. And I'm a big believer in looking at the numbers. Because numbers have an eloquence of their own. For example, after Roe v. Wade, this is just put in perspective, the first time in the history of our country when freedom was set back was the Dobbs decision. Our founders had this beautiful vision of America expressed in the Declaration. They had the courage, Thomas Paine said, the times have found us to declare our independence, to declare war, to win a war, to write these documents, the Constitution, but it had to be a compromise, and it had awful things in it, but it also had the power to amend. God bless them for that. Amend, abolish slavery, black men having the right to vote, women having the right to vote, Roe v. Wade, the right of privacy being the source of many good decisions in support of the Constitution, until the Dobbs decision. We went backward. And that very day, they said, well, since privacy no longer is a respected principle in the Constitution and precedence of the court no longer counts, everything else is on the table. That's what my personal favorite, Clarence Thomas, had to say. So really, this is dangerous. This could be Brown versus the Board of Education. It could be anything. Certainly could be anything that related to freedoms that we have. So just to give you this one. So when that happened, 2 years ago, we were in power. We put on the floor legislation to enshrine in the law Roe v. Wade. Not one Republican voted for it. That's what you would expect, no, not one. Then I put on the floor, I said to members, now we're going to put on the floor Kathy Manning of North Carolina, great member, we're going to put on her bill, which says that the simplicity of it all. Women have a right to contraception. Members said to me, oh, you're going to make them well. They're all going to vote for this, and people are going to forget that they voted against Roe v. Wade. I know my job. 195 Republicans voted no. Women do not have a right to contraception. 8 Republicans voted yes. 195, 8 women have the right. Who are these people? Who do they represent? What do they know? What do they not know? But that's what the Congress is. So when we talk about the shape of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, don't ask me about the Republican. I will say this. The country needs a strong Republican Party. It's very important. There have been great leaders in the party, some of them in the lifetime of some of us in here, some of you who aren't born yet, but great leaders and accomplished great things for our country. But it has been hijacked by a cult to an, I won't even go into him, but a cult, and that's just not right. You see, was trying to shut down government and telling the Republicans in Congress, don't vote for a bill, shut down government. Get out of here. So the only thing he did when he was president, when he had the majority for 2 years, was to pass a tax cut that he brags about that gave 83% of the benefits to the top 1%, adding $2 trillion to the national debt. I'm just like numbers because I think they have a certain eloquence. They're definite. I tell my grandkids of a teacher who said to a student in first grade, what is 1 and 1? He said, 2. And she said, what is 2 and 2? She said, 4. She said, good. He said, not good, perfect. So the numbers are eloquent too, even though they're not, maybe they could be a visual, they could be a word. So in terms of the Democratic Party, you have to ever be evolving into a more Democratic Party, especially as technology and telecommunication enable you to do so. But we have to be aware of misinformation as well. As far as the Republicans are concerned, I wish Liz Cheney said the other day, there has to be a substitution for whatever they are now. That's up to them to decide. But we're not well served by the cult that is there now. We have been well served by the Republican Party from before. And I say that as a baptized, practically staunch Democrat. So, but I do respect that our country needs that representation.
In your book that recently came out, The Art of Power, you talk about the historic double standard that has existed for women in politics. And when you talk about the advice that you've given to women considering to run or your colleagues for many years, you repeat one of my very favorite political quotes of all time, and it's yours. You have to be willing to take a punch, but you also have to be willing to throw a punch.
No, because...
For the children.
The children. No, I put that in the context of, let the record show, I'm quoting a Republican president, Teddy Roosevelt. He wrote in the arena speech, and it said, in the arena, you're no longer a spectator. So when people say they want to run for office, or when we're trying to encourage them to do so, we have to give the upside, the downside, and the downside is, this, again, as I said before, is not for the faint of heart. This is tough. It's hard, because once you strive for a position that has some power, you are a target. And nope, there's no bigger target than me. So women say, why would, I can't subject my family to that and the rest. And as it turns out, they were right. But nonetheless, so when you're in the arena, that's why I say you're in the arena, you have to take a punch, you have to throw a punch. For the children, it's really important. It is so important to know your why. I come back to that, as I said earlier. If you know your why, doesn't matter what they say. You're there for the fight, again, for the future. I mean, my why, again, wanting children, lived in poverty, I said it to you before. And when I'm talking to somebody about a subject, I keep thinking, is he here for the children? You know, what is this proposal he's making? What does that mean for the children, for the future? Elections are about the future. It belongs to young people, and we have to give them a fair democracy and a strong democracy, a fair economy, a planet that is suitable for breathing air and drinking water and the rest, and everything that would, and look what we're going through right now. Education, is that not the biggest upward mobility opportunity for children to reach their fulfillment, for a country to reach its aspirations and the rest? Nothing brings more money to the Treasury than investing in education. So know what the Republicans have in 9225? Abolishing the Department of Education. Because you know they teach critical thinking there in the schools. This is what we're dealing with, you know, 8 women. And so this is a fight that we have. And they try to distance themselves from the 2025, but that's not what they do on the floor of the House. They've already voted for it in the appropriations process. Abolish the Department of Education, especially Title I for economically disadvantaged areas. They want money going to those places, which are most cities and stuff, and also Head Start. They want to greatly reduce that. It's a trickle-down thing. Give tax breaks to the rich, increase the national debt. Don't feed the children, because that's what held up our budget last time. They didn't want to feed WIC, women, infant, and children. And so we have a different values in all of this with this crowd that is there now. But if people weigh in, if they hear from their constituents that people know, I want you to know, I know how you voted. I want you to know that that's not a representation of the values that I think should be in a national budget, which is should be a statement of our national values. So it is, and then you want to know about unfairness to women. Well, let me just say, first of all, I never intended to ever run for public office. Never. I mean, shy, bashful person that I am. I never intended to do that. And now I'm serious. I never liked to be in the public arena. I love politics, and I was chair of the party, but I could advance candidates and causes and all that behind the scenes. And that was a volunteer situation. So when I was asked to run, I went to my daughter, we had 5 children in 6 years and 7 days. I keep reminding my Archbishop of that, who excommunicated me, but because I didn't want to foist that on anybody else. That beautiful, wonderful miracle for us, but have women have their own right to choose. And so I went to our daughter. 4 were in college. They weren't very close. 4 in college, 1 still home going into senior year in high school. She was 16 at the time, Alexandra. You may know her, she's a filmmaker now. But anyway, I said, Alexandra, Mommy has an opportunity to run for Congress. People have asked me to run. I've never, ever had the desire, the ambition, or even given it a thought of running, but they're insisting that I run because they say, you love the issues, you can win, but I love my life, and it's up to you. If you want me to stay for this last year, I will, but if I win, I don't even know if I'll win. If I win, I'll be gone 3 nights a week. If there are 4 days, 3 nights, I'll be gone 3 nights a week. She says, Mother, now mind you, I'm saying Mommy, and she's saying Mother, get a life. And I had never heard that expression before. This was years ago. What teenage girl wouldn't want her mother out of the house 3 nights a week? So I got a life, and that was that. She says to me now, would you have done this if you had known what would happen to Dad, to Papa? We call him Papa, because he's a grandfather now, as I'm a grandmother. And she says, looking back, would you not do it? I said, no, let's look forward. If I had ever known that somebody would come into our house, some crazy conspiracy guy would come into our house looking for me with a hammer, things to tie your hands, or all that stuff, and hit pop on the head near death by a centimeter. No, I would never have run. I would never have run. But since it did happen, we have to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. We don't make jokes about it, as what's-his-name does, as recently as last week. He continues to make jokes about somebody out to assassinate me, but got my husband nearly there instead. So in any case, so then I got there, and then people encouraged me to run for leadership. So to your point, so I don't want to run. I love my committees. I love my policy work. I'm not competing with anybody. No, you have. Then I got tired of losing. 94, 96, 98, 2000. I'm a party chair. I know how to win elections. So I put myself out there because I thought I can make this a majority for the Democrats. But you have to have a goal and a plan to do it. So the men said, this is my personal favorite. Who said she could run? Poor babies. As if I were waiting around, women were waiting around for them. They said, you don't understand. Men have been waiting in a pecking order over time for positions to open up, and then they would follow their pecking order into them. I said, oh, they have a pecking order? Well, we've been waiting over 200 years, so we're going. But it was so strange. And then they said, make a list of the things the women want, and we'll do them. Oh, double poor babies. So I said to them, don't vote for me because I'm a woman, but don't vote against me because I'm a woman. Listen to what I have to say. And that's what I think Kamala Harris is doing right now. She's making her case for why she shouldn't be elected because she's a woman. She should be elected because she's the best person for the job. But it's glorious that she happens also to be a woman and a woman of color. So that's a great thing. But it is, and it's just a behavioral thing. And I think that people are getting over it more and more. But we have to, shall we say, call them on it from time to time because they don't even know. It's like 1,000 nicks a day. Why would you say that? Why would you say that? Well, because you always said it. But now it's different. And once you have the gavel, it's very different.
And I know that women don't need permission, but I know that in part because you said that. And that was part of that quote, and the essence of it that I love is that you have given an innumerable amount of women the permission to punch. And I do feel like we've seen the vice president land some really strong punches lately. And I do wonder if, this hard-fought progress and the example that you have shown so many of us has led to a bit of a sea change moment right now where strong women are actually earning the respect they deserve when they step into their power, rather than just being underestimated or punished. And certainly not total change, right? But it feels like something's shifting.
Well, in a way, here's the thing. It's not about worrying about what they think. That's their problem. Again, when men are saying, whoa, it's not your turn, forget about it. You just do your thing. Have confidence. Because, as I say to women, there's nothing more wholesome in the whole world of things than the increased participation of women in elective office, in government, politics, security, corporate America, academia, you name it, anything you can name needs more diverse. Gentlemen, no offense to you, it doesn't mean women are better. It means we have to be at the table. We have to be at the table, and it's really important for women to see that, to have confidence. In the history of the world, there's no one like you. The history of the world, there's no one like you. To the women, I say this. Well, the men too, but I'm talking about the women right now. No one like you. So take inventory. If you say, I'm just a housewife. That's your mom and a housewife, gold star. That counts as a lot. Raising kids, that's a big challenge. But whatever it is, how you were raised, what your education is, what your personal experience is, the work you've done, the mom you are, whatever it happens to be, makes something very authentic and different from everyone else. And that diversity. And I say that to people of color as well. And maybe I'll just close, two things I want to close with, because I know you have a full program. One is, when I was first elected a leader, and I went to my first meeting at the White House, I didn't even feel apprehensive. I didn't even prepare for it, because I've been to the White House many times as an appropriator, intelligence, leader in the intelligence committee and all that. So I go to the office, open the door, and I realized that this was unlike any meeting that I had been to before, or in fact, any meeting that any woman had ever been to before. Because there at the table, President, Vice President, Democratic and Republican leader, House and Senate, would be me as House. And now women are at the cabinet table, and that's a beautiful thing. The more, the merrier. But they're there at the will of the president. One vote counts, right, in that meeting. The will of the president. Not that he is not respectful of the diversity of the opinion. I mean, I know Joe Biden is. I don't know about that one. But I was there with the will of the House Democrats. So I was independent in what, and the president was saying, oh, Nancy's here. He's gracious and lovely, Joe Biden, no, forget him. President George W. Bush. Gracious, lovely. Oh, Nancy's here, and first woman, and oh, we're going to hear new things in our meeting. And as he's going off on that, I feel very closed in on my chair, very closed in. I never had that feeling since or before. Very closed in. All of a sudden, while he's talking, and I'm losing track of what he's saying, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Sojourner Truth, Alice Paul, all of them, they're all on the chair with me. And they say all at once together, at last we have a seat at the table. And then they were gone. And that was so remarkable, because not that I needed a reminder whose shoulders I was standing on, these women who fought, not that worked, not waited, but worked to make sure that women had the right to vote. And then to go on. When I went to Congress, there were 23 women out of 435. As a former party chair, so we have to change that. Now this session, we've had 94 Democratic women. I think they have 30-some Republicans. They're doing better, but we want even more. But not just more women, more diversity. That's my history story about that. Now, I'll close by saying this, what I think is the situation we're in and the stakes in this election. I'm from Baltimore originally, and any Baltimoreans here, any Marylanders? Okay. And the national anthem was written there, and we, as children, I mean, we're surrounded by the flag, this beautiful flag. And the national anthem, you know, at the end, home of the land of the free, home of the brave. Everybody cheers at the football game or wherever you happen to be. But I cheer sooner than that. When it says, proof through the night that our flag was still there. This is the night we're fighting through right now, to prove at the end that our flag is still there. As we pledge, every civic and academic day and otherwise, with liberty and justice for all. That's the fight that we are in. So we have to mobilize and own the ground to get out the vote. We have to message with boldness and progressiveness, but also non-menacingly, but unifyingly. And we have to have the money, the 3 M's. No wasted time, no underutilized resources, and no regrets the day after the election, if only I had walked one more precinct, multiplied by all of us here. One precinct, more calls, more door knocking, all the rest of that, postcards, the things that we all do. But it's all necessary because they have endless money, endless, dark money. But we have the people, and we just have to make sure that they turn out the vote so that we prove through the night that our flag is still there. So that's what we have to do in this election. We don't agonize, we organize. These races are close, just like the Olympics. Gold, silver, bronze, honored to be an Olympian, all within 1 second. So they're close. So don't be afraid when you see a close race. You just have to go for it to win, because our flag is at stake.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Certain that on January 6th, Hakeem Jeffries is the Speaker of the House. For all the issues that we care about, but also that day for the peaceful transfer of power. If we didn't have the majority last time, God knows what might have happened with him. God knows, and those other people. But Hakeem must be the Speaker. Thank you all for understanding.
Please welcome to the stage Tiffany Muller, President of End Citizens United.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. Can we hear it again for our forever speaker, Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi? We all know that we stand on her shoulders, and she's been such an incredible friend and advocate to us at End Citizens United. And we've been honored to be in the fight to try to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act alongside her. And come 2025, we're going to get it done. So, I'm Tiffany Muller. I'm the president of End Citizens United, and we're a grassroots organization made up of 4 million members across the country, dedicated to rooting corruption out of our government and expanding and protecting the freedom to vote. And I also want to give a special shout out and thank you to COURIER and Tara McGowan for putting this event on. Can we hear it for them? Tara was over here. Oh, there she is. She's one of the smartest political strategists I have ever met, and all I have to say is I'm so glad she's on our side. All right, so look, we are 41 days away from the election. That's 41 days to put in the work needed to make sure that we have a trifecta come next January and elect Speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries. I like it. Yes, yes, give it up again. But to make that a reality, we've been laser focused on the issues that can really make a difference in battleground districts across America. And one issue stands out above all, and that's Project 2025. I'm guessing maybe you've heard about it. That radical right-wing agenda that has become a serious liability for Republicans up and down the ticket. And to effectively leverage this issue, we at End Citizens United have spearheaded a coalition with Third Way and Move On to help campaigns and allies really be able to message on this effectively. And so I'm going to bore you all. No, I'm kidding. It won't be boring. But we recently conducted a House battleground poll that actually offers us really strong insight into how we can message on this over the next 41 days and use it to help win across America. And what these findings reveal is that Project 2025 is really disliked by voters, and they see it as a threat to their rights and freedoms. And when rights and freedoms are under threat, we know that democracy is under threat. And while Trump is the face of Project 2025, down-ballot Republicans are just as vulnerable. This issue is cutting through the noise. It represents a unique opportunity for campaigns to go on offense. So what does this look like? Well, to dig in a little bit, let's quickly talk through some of the results that we've found. So I know all of you are familiar with Project 2025, but it turns out voters are as well. As a matter of fact, 3 out of 4 voters know about it, and they don't like it at all. When asked what's standing out to them about it, what they mention most often is that it's undemocratic, that it'll take away rights and freedoms, and in particular will take away women's rights by banning abortion. And because voters are so familiar with it, it's also really deeply unpopular, really bad, really, really bad. It actually has a 52% unfavorable rating and only 11% favorable. That's awful. That's almost as bad as Congress as a whole. And it's not just progressives who are concerned about it. Opposition is widespread across the board. Independents dislike it, about 70% of independents don't like it, and even half of Republicans don't like it. So with numbers like these, is it any surprise that we see Republicans trying to run away from it? We saw Donald Trump trying to distance himself from it on the debate stage, right? But no matter how much he tries to detach himself, voters aren't buying it. 75% of voters closely associate Donald Trump with Project 2025, and 80% of voters believe he supports the policies and ideas behind Project 2025. And this filters down. And the candidates running for Congress link Project 2025 to congressional Republicans as well, with, again, 78% of voters believing that congressional Republican candidates support the policies within it. This can have a huge impact on elections across the map. So when we asked voters who they would vote for, a generic Democrat or a generic Republican in House battleground seats across the country, Democrats were leading by 4 points. That's great. But then when we said, who would you support? A Democrat who opposes Project 2025 or a Republican who supports Project 2025? And that's all the information we gave them. That lead increased to 18 points for the Democrats. That's a 14-point swing just on support of Project 2025. But we can't just hope that voters know about this. We have 41 days to make sure that we do our work to make sure that they understand what's at stake. Because look, they have a lot of pressing issues on their mind. But when we frame those issues in the lens of this radical agenda, we can actually energize the conversation. We can make the stakes clearer. Voters know that MAGA Republicans are weird and crazy, right? We all know this. But Project 2025 crystallizes how that weird and crazy goes beyond that and actually hurts their everyday life. And that offers us a huge strategic opportunity to go after Republicans and turn the Project 2025 vibes into votes for a Democratic trifecta. The path forward is clear, but the work is far from done. So we got to dig in, we got to educate voters about the dangers of this plan over the next several weeks. And if we do so, I truly believe we will win up and down the ballot. So at End Citizens United, we are diving in. We will be in congressional races all across the country, and we can't wait to do this work alongside each and every one of you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Please welcome to the stage for Pollercoaster Politics and Margins of Effort, Simon Rosenberg, Tom Bonier, and moderated by political strategist and CNN commentator Maria Cardona.
Hey everyone, buenas noches. Thank you for being here. And thank you for staying after Speaker Pelosi, we really appreciate it. I was really looking forward to this conversation because I have worked closely with Simon for many, many years, and have worked with Tom also in the last several years, and specifically in 2022, when everyone was predicting the red wave, and these two guys were always the ones that I would go to for hope. And there was a reason for that, and this is going to be part of the conversation that we're having tonight. But before we get into all of that, Simon, let me start with you. After 2022, when you were part of the giving hope to some of the desperate Democrats out there who were believing the red wave, you started Hopium Chronicles. Yep. And that came from that work that you did in 2022. So now, as we go into 2024, some of the pollsters are kind of going into some of the same patterns we saw in 2022. So I want you to level set for us before we start this conversation so that we can have a baseline and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I mean, because time is short, we got to get right to it. And I just want to say, isn't Maria amazing? We are old, dear friends. I know. I don't know that anybody punches harder on CNN every day than Maria Cardona, and so she's such an inspiration to me and a great friend. And it's great to be here with Tom. This is our first time we've been together in a live event since the election in 2022, which is kind of crazy. I don't know how that happened, brother. So listen, I think that you all know, for those of you who read Hopium Chronicles, you know what I'm going to say, which is I would much rather be us than them right now. You know, we are, if you look at polling in the last few weeks, Harris was already up 2 to 3 points before the debate. She then had this extraordinary debate performance. Trump melted down in front of all of us. And the race has shifted a point or two in our direction since then. You know, today, if you look at the high quality polls since the debate, she's been consistently up at 3, 4, 5. A Reuters poll came out today showing her up 6 and 7 points. This is about Biden 2020 numbers. You know, he won that election by 4.5 points. And I think you look in the battleground states, we're doing well. We're ahead in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. We now know the blue dot is going to be the blue dot in Nebraska, and we're going to win in Nebraska. Whoever thought we'd be cheering for Nebraska right here? And my friend Jane Klebb, who's the party chair there, is an amazing, yes, cheering for Jane, she's amazing. And you know, then we're going to fight it out now in these other 4 states, right? The so-called Sunbelt states. I don't really like that because I don't think North Carolina and Georgia have a lot in common with, you know, the Arizona and Nevada. But and I think that we're favored. You know, the goal now has to be to win all of these states, right? I think it's within our power to do. I mean, we have to recognize also, Maria, that what's happened with Kamala Harris in the last few months has been one of the most extraordinary political stories in American history. I mean, her ability to come in from nowhere, to consolidate the party, to pick a VP, to hold a convention, to kick Trump's ass in the debate, you know, which was an important threshold moment for her. This has been an incredible time, and the country's really rallying behind her right now. And Tom will get into it in a minute about some of the other things we're seeing. But I think we should feel very good about where the polling is right now. And the second thing is, which is I think will get more attention as we get close to the election, is the Senate polling in the battlegrounds is very promising for us. I don't think anyone who in the Senate thought we would be in this strong a position in the Senate at this point. They have had bad candidate problems again. They're struggling throughout the battleground. And Sherrod Brown is holding in Ohio, right? He's up 2, 3, 4 points. He was given a gift. He was given a big gift yesterday by his opponent making another mistake, his crappy MAGA opponent making another mistake. And then in Montana, Tester we believe, the family believes, that this is still a toss-up race. I know there's some polls showing it otherwise, but I don't think anybody's giving up there. And John Tester, never give up on John Tester. And then we've got a few other Senate races that could become real for us. We don't know. But we should feel really good about where we are. I mean, this has been a remarkable year for us, and I think that you know, the polling is going to be all over the place, but things are moving in the right direction, and we should be optimistic about what we're going to be able to do together.
Thanks, Simon. I think is key what you just said. Things are moving in the right direction. But when you see one poll one day that has Harris up 4 points, and then you see another poll another day that then has her down 2 points, people, that's why you feel like you're on a polar coaster, right? So, Tom, I think this is perfect for you because this is the angst that Democrats felt in 2022 for good reason. So talk to us about some of the key things that we can all have in mind as we see these polls that are all over the place that can give us sort of the grounding that real numbers, not just polls, but other indications that I think are more credible as to where the electorate is, that's where we should focus maybe a little bit more of our confidence and a little bit more of our attention, and why?
Yeah, look, 2022 is instructive in so many ways, and basically what we learned from 2022, I think a lot of the lessons of the mistakes that were made analytically, especially in the media, are very applicable to this moment, and I'll explain what I mean. If we think back to the Dobbs decision, June 24th, 2022, I think everyone agreed, at least for that one moment, that it was going to change that election. There was a lot of disagreement and frankly a lack of understanding of how, mostly from men. But Kansas answered that question, right, very quickly. The first week of August, you had that Kansas constitutional vote where the pro-abortion rights no vote won by 18 points. Our team at TargetSmart started looking at the data immediately, and the first thing we saw was that vote. I've talked about this a million times. I'll talk about it till the day I die. It's one of the most incredible things I've seen in the data. We saw that women were accounting for almost 70% of new registrants. That doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. If you see 53 or 54% one way or the other, it's unusual. To see 70%, it told us things have changed dramatically. And so Simon and I actually started working together at that point. We had been doing a lot of work in parallel, basically compiling the evidence, because we know what a red wave election looks like. In that case, we only had to go back to 2010, 2014, where we had two different flavors of red wave. And if we'll remember back to 2022, that was the general conversation in the media, was which flavor of red wave are we gonna have? Is it gonna be more like 10 or more like 14? No one would widen the aperture and say, but maybe it won't be either. So we looked at voter registration data. We looked at special election results. We saw Democrats overperforming in every election. The New York 19 special, winning a seat in Alaska, even seats, state legislative seats that were far out of reach, still overperformed by 7 or 8 points. And then the early vote data. And that was the most telling in a lot of ways, because it was actual people voting. The polls didn't tell us who was going to vote. And frankly, the polls suffer the most from their inability to answer that question. They can tell us how people are going to vote, but it's really hard to figure out who's going to vote. So you have to use this rich data. We have to keep in mind the media doesn't have access to this data in the way that folks within the campaign world do. And so that's what really, simply, it wasn't magic. I like to pretend that it was wizardry or some unusual genius that Simon and I have, but it wasn't. It was just looking at data in the context of historic election results. And so when you think about this year and what we've seen, the reality is, and we can talk about this more, but the reality is that that post-Dobbs dynamic that we saw in 2022 is not only still in place, it is much more in place. And we've seen more evidence of that. We've seen more increases in voter registration among these groups, some that are exceeding what we saw after Dobbs. We're seeing the same overperformance. There's one party that has underperformed in the polls consistently since the Dobbs decisions, and it's the Republican Party and Donald Trump.
So what you're saying is women haven't gotten over it, right? So it drives me crazy when I'm on these panels and these Republican men are saying, well, Maria, but the economy is the #1 issue for women. And I say to them, I was like, you realize that women have the ability to think about more than one issue when we walk into the polling booth, right? And it's just jaw-dropping to me. But Simon, you also make a very good point, which you had in a post today, about how to look at what Trump has done in light not just of the Dobbs decision, but the effects of the Dobbs decision, the tragedy that happened in Georgia, and how that can be sort of a key point of messaging for Democrats.
Yeah, and just one point I left out in those four Sunbelt states. One of the big stories of this election is how well we're doing in North Carolina. And this was even before Mark Robinson did whatever he did, right, last week, or did what he's ever done over the last 20 years, right? You know, of the last 8 public polls in North Carolina, we are tied or ahead in 7. We're actually, in many ways, doing better in North Carolina than we are in Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. And all of you know that Josh Stein has done a remarkable job as Attorney General there. Anderson Clayton is this new superstar of our party. Yeah, Anderson. And so just want to put a note here that the collapse of Mark Robinson is a really significant event because there is no Trump map without North Carolina, and it got a lot harder for them. So on your question, listen, you know, Donald, what I wrote today, and I try in Hopium to write more about us and talk about them as little as I can, but we do have to talk about them a little bit in this election. And Donald Trump not only sexually assaulted women, but he's now killing women in America. And it's incredible that we can even say that, right? Like, I mean, just think about where we are in our politics. But we learned last week, or over the last few weeks, that 2 women in Georgia have died due to the Trump abortion bans in Georgia. And I think this has changed the election. I think this has brought forward for many people the extremism is now not something that's abstract or something that happened 2 years ago, but that things are getting worse for women in America. The rights and freedoms that women have less rights and freedoms in the United States, not only than they had 50 years ago, but in most modern countries in the entire world. And as bad as things are now, if Trump and Vance win, it's going to get worse, and for the women of America. And one of the things that I want to say is that, as Tom and I have talked about, is that it's been so easy for male commentators over the last 2.5 years to dismiss this as a woman's issue, or that women care more about the price of eggs than they do about the loss of bodily autonomy. And I think that what's important for the men in this room is to realize that we are witnessing a degree of misogyny that is still jaw-dropping to me. The women are our sisters and our daughters and our moms and our coworkers, Maria, right? Everybody here, they're all of us. And that men have to stand up here because this has become a really dangerous moment in our history because we know that the misogyny that J.D. Vance has unleashed into the Republican Party, even worse than anything Trump has done in many ways, in my view, is something that is unacceptable in the United States. And so, dudes, it's time for you in this election, right, to stand up and stand up for the women of America. It's our turn now to go lead this fight, and it's not just up to them.
Amen, Simon. Tom, I want you to talk a little bit about the independent voter. And a lot of the angst that we're seeing is because the pollsters talk about how independent voters are now non-aligned, and that means, you know, it's a bad sign for Democrats, you know, per history. Talk to us a little bit about how we should read that.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, because this is like my pet peeve, and if they gave us another hour to talk about this, I could fill the whole time, but I'll just take like 2 minutes. A great example of this is actually what a lot of us probably were stressing about over the last 24 hours, which was the New York Times Siena polls that came out yesterday. I think yesterday? Yeah, sorry. And I spent a lot of time with this. The Arizona polls are a perfect example of this, of the exact issue, and I think something we need to be better informed about. We had August polls that looked pretty good, and then polls yesterday that didn't look good at all. This is the Pollercoaster, right? We're all riding it. We don't need to. And I dug into the data, and then I actually had some back and forth with Nate Cohn about this, and I'll give him credit, like he is accessible at times in answering questions. And if you look at it, what was the difference? The biggest difference in the 2 polls, it wasn't that the electorate of Arizona has suddenly turned against Vice President Harris. It's that they polled a very different set of unaffiliated voters in the state. They had one sample that was a fairly representative sample of the partisan ballots that we can see looking at the voter file, and then one in their poll that was released yesterday that frankly wasn't. This is a hard thing. Polling is hard, right? I especially feel for public pollsters. But a lot of you have seen these voter registration statistics that Republicans are pushing now, where they say we're out registering them. Look at the last 4 years. Well, the reality is the story is actually a lot more complicated. North Carolina, where, as Simon said, we've seen very positive data, especially in new voter registrations, especially since Vice President Harris took over at the top of the ticket. Republicans, 4 years ago, were 30% of registered voters. Today, they're 29.8% of registered voters in the state. But they're bragging about that because the Democratic share has actually dropped slightly more. Why is that? Because younger voters, Gen Z, overwhelmingly are registering as unaffiliated voters. As a Democrat, would I love for them to check that box and register as a Democrat? Sure. Would I care more about how they're actually voting? Absolutely. And if we want to talk about polls, look at the Harvard poll that came out today, the Harvard IOP poll, which actually shows Vice President Harris with a larger margin among these young voters than President Biden had in 2020. I trust those numbers a lot more, not just because they're good for us, because frankly I've seen polls that are good for us recently that I don't trust, but because of their competency in polling here, and because they didn't just talk to 70 voters under the age of 30. They talked to how many? A lot. Thousands. And so we're seeing that more. The same thing with voters of color, where you're seeing very small subsamples, especially for those who are identifying as unaffiliated but are voting Democratic. That's generally been the biggest issue when we've seen polls skewing. And for the most part, when you see these polls you don't like, it's that they have a hard time at getting the independent or unaffiliated voters. Important to keep in mind, and we're only going to see more of this, unfortunately, between now and Election Day.
But this is, can I just say, this is one of the things that makes 2024 different than 2016 and 2020, because part of what happened in 2022 is that if you believed it was going to be a red wave, then you dismissed data that was showing a better election for us. What's happening in 2024 is that 2024, every election's unique. It's going to be like 2024. It's not going to be like 2016 and 2020. And two things that Tom has been talking about publicly that I just want to put an exclamation point on. One is that Trump, we all hear in the media, and you go up against people on CNN who say this all the time, that Trump has these magical superpowers and that he's going to get 3 or 4 points better than the public polling because that's what happened in 2016 and 2020. But that's not what's been happening since the spring of 2022 in Dobbs. The exact opposite thing has been happening. It actually happened for Trump. Trump underperformed his public polls in 19 out of 20 primary, in the Republican primary. It's not what happened to the fascists in Europe, in the European elections. It's not what happened to the fascists in France. It's not what happened to the Tories in the UK, right? And what's happened is that it's my view that the voters of the West have woken up to the threat of the far right, the fascists, whatever manifestation they are, the Tories, and that they may say they're going to vote for them, but when it comes to actually voting, a bunch of them are not choosing it. And so, in fact, we may see in 2024 the opposite of what happened in 2016 and 2020 with this secret Trump vote, right? He may actually underperform public polling and not overperform it, because that would make this election that's going to happen in a few weeks consistent with all of the other elections that we've seen for the last 2.5 years in the United States. The second thing that Tom has raised in the last few days that is really important that we're just beginning to really think about is that the independent vote is much more democratic this time. This is not showing up in the polls in many cases because the young people who have registered in such large numbers are registering as unaffiliated, and therefore the independent vote is something that we're going to be collaborating on and writing about, is that the pollsters are going to have to recalibrate a little bit to recognize that the independents this time are going to be much more democratic. Some of the polls have seen huge shifts in independent voters from Republicans to Democrats in recent weeks. And those polls are the ones that are getting this election right? Because that would be consistent with what we're seeing in the swing of young people. Kamala Harris has the ability in this election to get close to Obama 2008 numbers with young people and have the highest turnout of young people in American history, depending on how this election, how much work we all go do together. Young people are engaged. They are wildly for her now, right? And the opportunity for us to blow this thing out because of young people is really within our grasp. And for the young people that are here, you've got a big job to do, because if we can mobilize 18 to 20, young people in this election, it's the difference between a close election and something that feels like something that's a clear repudiation of MAGA in November.
So related to that, I want to ask this question to both of you. And it's also something that a lot of people talk about, but I don't think when they really talk about it, they know exactly what it is they're talking about. And that is independent voters, yes, but undecided voters. Do they really exist? And I mean, seriously, what do you think? And if so, what do you think? And are they really undecided, or are they undecided in terms of, well, maybe I'm just not going to go vote? I mean, I really struggle with this.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard for us who are inside the bubble, so to speak, to imagine that anyone could see what we've seen over the last 8 years and actually say, well, maybe this, maybe that. There are some. I think we're maybe over-calibrating a bit, and in terms of the potential, I think it's more what you mentioned at the end there. It's the persuasive element of making the case for people to go out to vote. Yeah. And we did see, we've seen, when we've seen the polling swing since July 21st, that's been a huge element of it. The reality is, yes, Democrats were underperforming prior to July 21st, primarily with women voters, younger voters, and voters of color. Right. That's why when we put out that registration analysis, I hope y'all have seen, you can go to TargetSmart.com, by the way, and we've got all this stuff out there, but we saw in that first week, again, numbers that we've never seen before in registration, in some cases tripling the rates from 4 years earlier, and it was among women, younger voters, and voters of color. And when you looked at young women of color, overwhelmingly the biggest numbers. And so that persuasive element was very clear there. There's still more work to be done. There's still more opportunity and potential there. But I think from a persuasion perspective, I think that's probably the biggest potential in front of us.
Simon, you always end your talks with, we have more work to do, so, work more, worry less. There are 6 weeks left. Yeah. What do we need to do?
Well, I think the most important thing that I think we can all do is to do what I call voting on day one, which is to recognize that our voting system has changed a lot. We're no longer an election day party or an election day oriented. Tom says election day is now the last day of voting. And the way to think about it is that in a campaign, when you vote, the campaign gets a recording that you voted, not how you voted, but that you voted, and you come off the GOTV rolls for the campaign. If all hardcore Democrats around the country vote on day one, it allows the campaign, meaning that the first day or the second day you can vote wherever you live, that when you vote on day one, you make it easier for the campaign to reach and connect with lower propensity Democrats, which increases our turnout, which makes it more likely we win. And so the way to think about this election is, I think about winning it in October, not in November. If we can drive the early vote hard, like we did in the midterms in 2022, we can win this, we can run up the score and make it impossible for Trump to catch up. It's also, the early vote being strong is also an affirmation of our democracy. You'll have millions of Americans seeing their election system work the way it's supposed to, which is obviously a big middle finger to the other guy, right? And so if the most important thing we can do now is to not volunteer in late October or November, but to volunteer right now. We've got an advantage. People love Kamala Harris, right? We've got momentum. This is the time to do your work, to reach voters, the time to give your money, the time to go, do what you need to go do. It's right now. Do not wait to the end of October, early November.
Tom, trends to watch as all of this happens so that people can kind of take a breath and not be so anxious.
Yeah, keep looking at the data. And again, we're going to get this incredibly rich data set. By the way, does anyone here want to admit to coming here from across the river and having voted already? All right.
Yes. All right. Yeah. Superheroes.
A lot of votes have actually been cast in Virginia already. And so that's the data that we're going to be looking at. We have a website for that too. Target Early.
What's your website?
targetearly.targetsmart.com, I believe. It's not launched yet. It'll be launched very soon. Our team does incredible things. They work miracles. And that data will be publicly available so you can actually look at it, this is the key, in the context of previous cycles to understand where it's going. And so that sort of, there'll be a lot of Republican misinformation out there.
Yeah.
That's the data that we're going to be looking at.
Social media accounts for you?
Oh, at Bonier, Bonier.
Yeah, and Hopium Chronicles, and also I'm doing a new series with Tara McGowan with Courier Newsroom called Closing Strong, which comes out every Thursday and Friday, where we'll be interviewing this week. We're going to be interviewing Julie Rodriguez, the campaign manager for the campaign, for the Harris campaign.
Tune in, everyone.
And I just want to also just say thank you to all of you for being here for Courier. Tara and her team do amazing work. I'm a proud supporter of everything they're doing. They're an incredibly important part of our ecosystem and our family. And Tara is a brilliant young leader, so thank you for being here for them tonight as well.
And that is time, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Tom. Gracias, everyone.
Please welcome to the stage for Reaching Normies in a Decentralized Media Environment, Fez Shakir, Brad Bauman, Kyle Tharp, Emily Amick, and moderated by Vice President of Politics at Crooked Media, Shaniqua McClendon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I know we are the final panel before the reception. Sorry, I'm not supposed to do that up here, but hello. So we're really excited to close out the day with this conversation about how you reach normal people. I think probably if you are in here today, you maybe are not a normal person. You consume a lot of politics, you know what's going on, but ultimately, those of us in this room are not going to be the voters that probably are going to swing the election. It's going to be the people that we're trying to reach. And I'm really excited to be up here with our guests, who I'll introduce in 1 second. But I just want to reflect a little bit on kind of how we got here. 2016, our fractured media environment is a big part of why we're here. Conservative media kind of playing in that fractured media environment really well is part of why we got here. And as was mentioned, I work at Crooked Media. We were founded because Donald Trump won his election. But a big part of it is we started trying to meet people where they are. And with our media environment so fractured, people are in a lot of different places. And so as we talk to our panelists today, we'll be able to hear how each of them are reaching those people in those fractured places and trying to get them involved in our election. But really quickly, I'm going to introduce our panelists. To my immediate left, Emily Amick is the Instagram personality Emily in Your Phone and former counsel to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. She's the author of New York Times bestseller, Democracy in Retrograde. And next we have Brad Bauman, who's the co-founder of White Dudes for Harris, a viral grassroots, you can clap for that, a viral grassroots campaign engaging men in support of the campaign. And next we have Fez Shakir, who's the founder and executive director of A More Perfect Union, a nonprofit education, advocacy, and journalism organization with a mission to build power for the working class. And last but not least, Kyle Tharp, who's the author of For What It's Worth, the leading newsletter about the internet and politics. He's also the managing director of Courier's national team. So another round of applause for our guests today. So this first question is for all of you, and Emily, we can start with you and just go down. But again, this panel is about reaching normal people in different parts of the electorate that will make a key difference in the election this November. So each of you has a deep experience or interest in reaching those folks. In your opinion, what is one key group of voters that needs to be reached by either campaign in this final stretch, and why? And then who would you say these people are? How would you kind of define them?
Well, I think the campaign has been very clear about the sort of 5 buckets they're trying to reach. One of those buckets is the quote-unquote suburban woman, the soccer mom, right? There's, I think, this group of women who are generally part of the exhausted majority, which is 67% of America, people who are sort of in this middle, right? Like, they merely exist not on a wing. They exist in the middle. Many have been, I think, really engaged recently because of either gun violence or reproductive freedom. And especially for my audience, many of whom are moms, they've gotten really interested in politics because of their kids. And what I have found in my experience is that these women have 2 defining characteristics. One is a sense of mistrust, and I think the fragmented media environment has been really challenging. Because there's so much information coming at you. And I think, anyone who's ever had a baby knows that suddenly, like, everyone is telling you, right? Like, what to use, what's safe, what's not. You're getting just overwhelmed with an egregious amount of information. How do you know what to believe? And I think there's very much this feeling of overwhelm with political information. And so they're looking for parasocial relationships. They're looking for individuals who they trust that person, and they trust that person to filter information and facts. And I read one study that found that my audience trusts Instagram influencers and podcasters, right? And that's where they're looking for their information. Yeah. And I think the other defining characteristic is that they're really busy. And they're working jobs. They're putting food on the table. They're trying to get their kids to the dentist appointments, right? We all have so much going on. They're on Instagram. The reason I'm on Instagram is because my audience is on Instagram. I also I'm a bitch for the platform. I love it. I'm my audience, right? Like, I am my people. That's why it works. But I think that so much about what we learned post 2016 is we can't assume our audience is coming to us. We have to go to our audience. And certainly that's what I've been trying to do.
Brad?
Well, first and foremost, given the limited resources and limited time, I am not going to come up here and suggest that white dudes are where we should be spending the majority of our time or efforts. But there is a certain segment of white dudes. And I was reminded the last weekend, my wife and I went to her hometown in rural central Pennsylvania, and we were with someone who basically like an uncle to her, who is a 70-year-old union member, who looked at me and said, Brad, I really don't know what I'm doing this time. And you could just tell that on the one hand, he was grappling with this media environment that he is deeply ensconced in, the Fox News, the AM radio, the constant din of these hosts who are basically telling this community that they need to be afraid of everyone and everything around them all the time, and that the only answer is to turn your back on democracy and support Donald Trump and the group of weirdo fascists that are, surrounding him. But at the same time, he senses that something is wrong, deeply wrong with what they're saying and what they're doing. And there is this moment right now where we have an opportunity to move some of these folks off the limb, off the ledge. And I think that what it's taking, and really the way that we are approaching the problem of reaching those folks, is by saying that it's our responsibility as white dudes to talk with other white dudes, and that there's something very powerful that's taking place in terms of that hand-to-hand, person-to-person communication. When I look back on whatever happens over the next year, the thing that I am going to really reflect on is that right now, as we're talking amongst each other, there are 3,000 white dudes who are participating in a training call with our partners, the National Democratic Training Committee, in which they're talking about how to reach out to their friends, to their neighbors, to other white dudes, and have these critical conversations with them. And like, no matter what happens, I think that that process is something that we're going to want to replicate over and over again and move further and further as we start to grapple with how we're pulling people out of that media environment where they are turning towards this other thing. And so that's kind of where we're at on that.
Thank you. Faz?
Well, let's stipulate that we're trying to reach both the normal and abnormal alike. And in doing so, I am certainly thinking a lot about working class people, people without a college degree, making under 100K, feeling that the world is a little bit more difficult for them. And in part a reaction to the prior panel, all three people I love and respect. And I hear sometimes in the discourse, and I don't know if you caught it, that sometimes when we mention the economy, it's like, well, we got to move off to abortion, and we got to make sure we elevate these issues that we're going to be winners on, and we could give a little bit of a shorter shrift to that conversation, and we got to do both. We got to do all of it, right? But we can't cut that conversation on the economy short. And to me, when I look at the people who are struggling around the battleground states in particular, but across all of America, there's a degree of anger. That anger, that emotion, is one that we need to associate with. Sometimes with those of us who come from places of decency and we're doing well and we're doing nice, it's not couth to be angry. It's uncouth, right? But that anger is being fed by the right in its misinformation campaigns and Fox News by giving you an irrational anger. Here's Springfield, Ohio. Here's some bullshit. We can feed them rational anger. And we are. I mean, there's reasons to be angry in a justified way if you're a working class person in this country. You're being exploited. You're being robbed of your paycheck in truly manipulative ways. That stories resonate with people. They don't expect you to solve it. And when I hear a lot of Democrats talking about the economy, it's not that sometimes I hear them struggling with not whether to talk about it, but how. How am I going to talk about it? And in some ways, people are not expecting you to wave a magic wand and fix things that have been problems for 3 or 4 decades. They're asking you, do you see my hurt and my pain? Do you recognize it? Do you know it is happening, and do you care about it? We can meet that threshold. We can meet that threshold. And you go to a lot of places, that's why I worry that we don't talk about the economy enough. You go talk about Uber drivers. Are you being exploited by the algorithm? You talk about, those of you who live in manufacturers' homes, how do you feel about private equity takeover? Today we got the Department of Justice filing a lawsuit against Visa that is engaging in predatory price gouging against you. We've got enough data points within this administration and the efforts that Democrats have engaged in. I didn't even go through prescription drug issues and a whole variety of other areas that Lena Khan and the FTC are taking on, that I don't think we have the language yet that has matched our politics. So while you see Democrats correctly, rightly engaging in policy actions, we are not quite yet taking that policy action and translating it to a fight over changing a rigged economy to make it work for you. And in that fight of a rigged economy, the number one thing we're finding in polls is that people are telling you that over 80% fear and feel that big business has too much power over their lives. Now, that doesn't mean you're at war with them all the time. You're fighting for people against the powerful. And we have a story to tell about it. And to my frustration sometimes in the way we have talked about it, we aren't doing a good enough job, but when More Perfect Union, when we do these stories, I see the resonance of it is so powerful, particularly with people who aren't fully engaged and don't love politics, hate both parties. They love this content. And I think, I would love to see us talk about, while we fight for democracy, absolutely critical, don't forget that there's an economic component to that democracy. We fight for political democracy, the ballot box. We fight for economic democracy as well. That economic democracy is workplace democracy at work, right? Organizing a labor union, whatever it is to get your rights heard, fighting against non-compete bans, having freedom in the workplace. And marketplace democracy, small businesses that can succeed, taking on a major behemoth like Ticketmaster and making sure that small businesses can compete as venues, as small venues in America. These kinds of things, the essence of what it means to live in small towns and to have neighbors know each other is built around this economic livelihood, which we have a vision for. And I want us to talk about it more, and it will reach a ton of people if we do it well.
Yeah, and I'll yes. If you don't follow More Perfect Union on the socials, you totally should. It's amazing. I think I'll keep my answer really short because it's kind of a cop-out because it touches on a lot of these groups. But I would say a key audience that I've seen a lot of people talking about, and both campaigns reaching, including outside groups and media companies as well, are young people who don't really follow the news or politics at all, and they can be like parts of all of these different categories. I think you see that so much with things like why everyone's talking about Taylor Swift's endorsement just a couple weeks ago. You know, if you don't really follow the news, but maybe you were nudged a couple times by a bunch of people to maybe get into this voting thing, and then you see Taylor Swift do something and share a link, that's like a very important trigger mechanism. I think you see Trump reaching out to people who maybe are into UFC, United Fighting, and sort of other right-wing streamers and YouTubers. You see the Harris campaign just going completely overboard in trying to reach people that don't typically engage with political content. And you've even seen it before Harris took over with the ticket with the White House doing an amazing job of going on different podcasts that are just completely non-political. So I think that audience is kind of a wild card here. They are also, by nature, not likely to engage with political stuff. So if either side can just make serious inroads with groups that really don't pay attention to politics, it'll be a big deal.
Yeah. This next question is, I'll point to Kyle and Faz. And Kyle, we can start with you since you had a short answer. So ultimately, the reason we want to reach these normal people or normies is because we want to win elections. And there's been a lot of attention to how our media environment has been fractured. I would love if each of you could speak to how that has played out, especially with the tactics that campaigns are using to reach these folks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, particularly I've been tracking sort of the political conversation on social media for the past 5 years through my newsletter. But you've seen just so much conversation this cycle about both campaigns being on TikTok. There's so many different factors that have happened this cycle that were not in place last cycle. You know, traditionally campaigns would engage on places like Facebook, right? That you've heard so much in 2016 and 2020 about the power of Facebook and reaching people there. And earlier, you know, over the past 2 years, Facebook, Meta, Facebook's parent company, has really withdrawn from politics. And so there are not a lot of places online where campaigns can distribute their content and their message organically through the algorithms to people that don't already follow them. TikTok is pretty much, and YouTube in that regard, is pretty much one of the only places online that you can do so. So I think that's been really fascinating to watch, how both campaigns are tactically just really focused on the places where they can just spread their content most virally. And that has just changed dramatically even in the past year or two.
Yeah. Faz?
You know, I was just, as Kyle was talking, I was reminded of a story in Pennsylvania that I just heard the other day. People who are knocking on doors in Western PA and unions, and they were reporting back that at the doors, this is a predominantly black neighborhood, they heard that young black men were telling them, I'm going to vote Trump because he's going to get me that stimmy. Mm-hmm. And they were perplexed. What the hell are you talking about? Yeah. Stimmy? And they had to go back and look at it, unpack it, and where the hell is this coming from? Turns out it's some TikTok that somebody said that Donald Trump, if he comes into office, is going to give you another stimulus check like you did last time around. And somehow in, you know, probably misinformation campaign peddled by somebody to target these people. And my point coming out of it is one of our jobs at the doors is going to be increasingly over the next few cycles to ask people as you knock, say, hey, where do you get your news? Where do you consume? How are you consuming it? Because it's going to mark the fact that so many things there are so many things we might not know about people and what they're consuming because of the fractured environment that you're just talking about. And there are fewer and fewer people because of the modern media environment. I won't get into the discourse right now because I want the other people to talk, but there are very few media outlets trying to reach scale. COURIER is trying to do it with like 11 states, I think, and counting, where, you know, we're trying to do more perfect union. But now the modern media environment, because of what it is a version of a Substackization. You find, which is all great. We want more outlets and proliferation, but everybody building their moats of here's 50,000, here's 100,000, here's 500,000 people that I talk to, which is all fine and good. Again, But we also need the people who speak to 10 million, 20 million, reaching scale. And I will say on the right, this is where we on the left are still catching up a bit. On the right, there's a reason why the misinformation travels. When Tucker's got a platform of blah, 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 you have X millions, and Ben Shapiro's got a platform of bazillions, and they can more easily share because they're reaching a scale. And one of our jobs over the next few years is to reach that scale.
Yeah. Brad and Emily, this next question's for you. And Emily, we can start with you first. So being in DC, many of us just kind of eat, sleep, and breathe politics and can sometimes be in a news echo chamber. What are you most worried about that the mainstream political press is missing in relation to voter or audience sentiment this cycle?
It's sort of funny to be on this panel because I stay out of media criticism in my professional life. I think that, so I published a book this summer called Democracy in Retrograde. Please pick up a copy, you'll love it. And one of the goals of the book is to meet people where they're at and to say, your feelings are valid, very much the same emotional resonance we're hearing from the rest of the panel. Like, things are very upsetting. Things are very chaotic, but like, you have the power. And I think one of the things that's sort of like the outrage cycle of politics, which as a content creator, I can tell you, I know why outrage politics exists, because if I post an outrageous post, it gets a lot of views, right? And I, as a creator, am like, zing, reward. And the problem with outrage politics is it tells the audience a very important lesson, which is like, everything's stacked against you, nothing can ever change, there's no point in participating, you should tap out. Or it sends them into emotional overload and they can't handle it because they get so stressed out by how awful everything is and they tap out. And democracy cannot exist without the people's engagement, but also communities across this country, right? Like, we need speed bumps, we need clean water, right? Like, we need all of these things. We need people on the PTA. We need all of these disparate things across the country, and I think there very much are people all across the country who are engaging for the first time. We have all this conversation about disengaged voters and da-da-da-da, but I get DMs every single day about people who are having conversations about politics for the first time, who are getting engaged for the first time in their local communities, not just running for office, but also like normal things that normal people do, right? One of my followers whom I've gotten to know sent me a DM recently that she realized that the bus lane in front of her house was really unsafe. People were speeding. She called the city, they're getting cameras placed on the buses. All right, it's a small thing. And I'm not like a big fan of the good news industrial complex because it seems like quite patronizing to me. But like, nonetheless, I think there's a lot of stories here about like government working well and the power of government. And I think it's very hard to tell that story in the current media environment because there is also so many terrible things happening, but it is an important one.
Brad?
So I'm going to go back to something that I think Tom and Simon talked about and Kyle touched on really quickly, which is that America right now is in the midst of a generational shift, and political reporters have absolutely no idea how to cover it at all. They do not understand young voters. They do not understand Generation Alpha. They don't understand Generation Z. They have really no idea what is happening. And what you're seeing, and what we have been seeing for the last couple of years, is a real clash of cultures between the emergent culture of young voters and this generation that is ascending, and at the same time, a lot of kind of the waning power of older generations as they are starting to give way. And I think that there isn't a really good way for reporters, specifically reporters who are based in the Beltway, to truly understand that unless we get a little bit smarter about how we are telling that story, how we are really leaning in on what this new generation is asking for, why their political ideology is something that is so preternatural to who they are. an explanation of the deep anger that they have seen that they feel in terms of a government and a system that have never worked for them, and ultimately how that is really translating into a large swath of cultural trends that are really going to define what America is going to become far past this election.
Thank you. So we only have 3 minutes left. So I'm going to give the last question to everyone. And yeah, take 45 seconds or so. What unknown factors are you watching most closely this election? Kyle, we can start with you and come back down.
I think the one thing I just don't know what's going to happen with is, the Trump campaign, the right, has been really focused on young white men, reaching them, like I said, with like UFC stuff, weird corners of the internet. Those people are typically the least likely to actually vote. So they're trying really hard to reach those people, but it's unknown of how motivated those types of folks are to actually come out and support Trump this time around. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and then echoing that, the fear that I have in watching the Trump campaign, not a dummy, in the sense that I think they know they don't have 50+% in this country and in most battleground states. So what do you need to have happen if you have less than 50% of the vote? And you worry that Kamala might have more than 50. Well, you got to depress the vote, right? You got to get people skipping the line and name your place, Dearborn, Michigan, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, wherever. Skip the line, don't even vote, or vote Jill Stein, vote, whatever that third party person is, just go that way. And I imagine as we head into the last few weeks, there'll be some efforts, and what I worry about again is that what I was referring to earlier was you don't even know what's happening, right? You catch up to it too late, that when you knock on some doors, you hear oh, you saw what about third-party candidates? Where'd you get that from? So that's one thing I worry about.
For me, I think it's the return to field. This is a year in which field organizing, GOTV, is back, and back in a real way, and back in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And our ability to make sure that either through the campaign or through the work that others are doing, that we are knocking and dragging folks to the polls, and that those efforts are resourced correctly and that they're being run efficiently, I think is going to make a huge difference. And nobody's really talking about what that means, considering that historically that's always meant an additional 3 to 5 percentage points above and beyond what were our expectations in the polls.
Every time an RFK Jr. story breaks, I think couldn't get weirder, couldn't get worse, and then it does.
I had 5 seconds. It's funny, one of my professors from grad school, he's always it's gonna get weirder. And after the Trump's first assassination attempt and then Biden steps down, I text him and I was like, it cannot get weirder than this. And he's like, oh yeah, it will.
Baby bear.
Exactly.
Baby bear.
Exactly.
It can get weirder.
That is all the time we have. And just to close us out, I would not be doing my job if I didn't make a plug. Brad just mentioned field and how we have to get on the doors and do what we have to do. If you all are interested or know people who are, I would encourage you to send them to votesaveamerica.com, where we have our Organize or Else program that people can sign up for impactful volunteerships around the country. And then I'll just close on this. Each of the panelists we have up here, they are speaking to really specific audiences. And so if you know people in your life who fall within the categories of the audiences that they reach, encourage them to follow them on their different platforms. Something that we have to do is get the eyes, ears, and attention of people on progressive media platforms. It's the only way those messages will start to carry out further. It might feel like a small thing, but the right is really leaps and bounds ahead of us. And so in order to close that kind of information gap, combat mis and disinformation, it's important for elections, but also just kind of the fabric of our society and it not deteriorating more than it has. So I would leave you all with that. And then just finally, another round of applause for our great panelists.
To close out the evening, Courier's founder and publisher, Tara McGowan.
I promise I will keep this short. I am hungry and thirsty, as I think many of you are. I just wanted to thank everybody so much for coming and supporting this event. As you guys know now, I'm the founder and publisher of Courier. If you don't already follow Courier, I am going to ask you to take your phones out and go to the platform that you use, whether it is Instagram, TikTok, X/Twitter, Threads. If you want to go to the website, please go. It's at Courier Newsroom on all the socials. YouTube is Courier HQ. You can watch my weekly series with Simon Rosenberg, who you saw closing strong, but please follow us, please spread the word. We have newsrooms in 11 battleground states across the country, and Kyle, who runs our national account, we just launched that last year, and it is pushing 600,000 followers on TikTok and close to 300,000 on Instagram, and we are really trying to change the conversation, especially around the elections and voting and the importance of it for people who don't pay attention. So thank you guys so much for supporting the work. There is a happy hour reception downstairs in the basement, free drinks and small bites. There's a merch table out front where you can buy a very cool existing in the context baseball cap for Kamala Harris. So please, thank you so much for coming, everybody. Thank you to our sponsors, Vote Save America and Citizens United, and for my amazing staff who pulled all of this together, who is both remotely covering the live streams and the onlines and in person. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful night.